Hi and welcome all participants to Helsinki Think Company's first ever remote Think Tuesday. Today we're having a panel discussion about the societal meaning of artificial intelligence and big data. Think Tuesday is our program concept where we invite experts to talk about various topics, and Think Tuesday has been previously successfully organized in our Helsinki Think Company premises with themes such as sustainable food industry, citizen empowerment, inclusion, what and how, and impactful women. And this is due to the circumstances, as I said, first ever remote Think Tuesday, but I also like to think that it's nice to try out different things with this concept, even without the pandemic. So on that remark, also greetings to everyone who is watching this later. And before we start, I would like to remind you that the panel will be recorded and distributed later in Helsinki Think Company's channels, such as YouTube or Facebook. Think Company itself is an entrepreneurship society under the University of Helsinki. We are focused on bringing academics to action through impactful businesses. We organize one-off events such as this Think Tuesday, but we also have broader program concepts such as idea accelerators and hackathons. Currently ongoing is Unaten, which is a 10-day open innovation design process inviting students to develop solutions to address challenges related to the COVID-19 post-emergency. Then we have upcoming Planet A, which is a 3-week online challenge focused on co-creating solutions to a truly sustainable living on our planet, so we do not need a Planet B. The challenge revolves around 2 main themes: environmental education and limited resources. I myself am Roope Keränen. I'm the secretary at this year's Think Company's board, and I'll be hosting and moderating this Zoom event. Without further ado, we could start with our experts. Maybe we'll start with Dina. Dina, you're welcome. You can introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks a lot. Okay, so about myself. I am currently a researcher in the ethics of artificial intelligence at the Department of Social Sciences here at the University of Helsinki. My background is both in philosophy and ethics and in programming. So I'm not a computer scientist, but I have experience in programming. And so my interest in broader area is to find ways of bridging computer science and philosophical ethics in ways that are most beneficial for the development of technology and for the society.
Thank you very much. Next up,
thank you.
Frans, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Frans. I'm kind of software engineer, entrepreneur. I'm basically running at the moment a company, Human Engineering, where we try to improve people's lifestyle by measuring their blood sugar levels and then analyzing the blood sugar and then determining which kind of food is good for each person. And at the same time, I'm still a student and studying at Aalto University. So my perspective will be more about student perspective to AI. And of course, I have studying kind of more focus on AI on the Aalto University. And I have also like tiny short exchange at Stanford University, where I do a couple of AI classes. And yeah, and also I'm being part of an organization, Robot Uprising, which is kind of like student-driven organization where we try to encourage people to get fascinated about AI and robotics. And it's kind of the practical meaning, how to like make people excited about AI and robotics, especially students. But yeah, so yeah, my background will be more about like community and like student perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Next up, Antti Honkela, if you could introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Antti Honkela, Associate Professor of Data Science at the University of Helsinki, Department of Computer Science. And my sort of study background is somewhere in between mathematics, statistics, computer science. My research area is mainly in machine learning. Worked on some applications in computational biology and lately also a lot in privacy-preserving machine learning. And so I'm also coordinating professor of the research program in privacy-preserving and secure AI at the Finnish Center for AI. And so my background is in machine learning and sort of artificial intelligence. I guess I still need to learn to see myself as an AI researcher. Somehow I'm not particularly fond of the term and sort of prefer more these down-to-earth approaches like machine learning in that sense. But that said, obviously kind of there's these technologies that are now being branded as AI are sort of being very widely used and sort of in general very interested in these societal impacts and aspects of these as well as this privacy is sort of the technical field that I'm sort of most aware, but also following other developments.
All right, thank you. Very, very interesting. Maybe we can talk a little bit later about those conceptions and misconceptions that you mentioned that people have on AI, but that's very interesting. Next up, Teemu, could you give a little info about yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much, Roope, and good afternoon to all our numerous participants and attendees. My name is Teemu Roos, and I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Helsinki, like Antti, and I also sort of I'm in charge of the AI education program at the Finnish Center for AI, which is jointly by Aalto and University of Helsinki and VTT. So I'm also like as my background, I'm a computer scientist and like a tech person. But then I've been recently involved more and more in kind of education and public awareness campaigns around AI, most notably the Elements of AI course, of which I'm the lead instructor. And that has sort of, let's say, put me in a kind of a spotlight in terms of many societal discussions or these discussions about the societal impact of AI, sort of. And it's been a sort of a journey or a learning path for me as well to be able to appreciate the societal impact and importance of these technologies. And it's all very interesting. I'm looking forward to our discussion a lot.
The first question I could put to Frans, since you are an entrepreneur, what would you consider are the pros and cons of sharing private information with artificial intelligence and its operator?
Oh yeah, that's actually a good question. I think the kind of important thing to know is actually what is like AI in this concept. Since it basically AI will be more about statistics and analyzing, finding patterns from different statistics and making some conclusion for that. And that way, if you think more data, especially for our current models, more data helps so much more to improve the data and like improve selling, etc. But I think the concerning part is that when we gather the data and store it, I don't know, store forever, because why to delete it? Because it's valuable content. And someday, eventually someone will leak the information, the company will be hacked, or someone evil guy will take the company out and use the private information for like bad habits to do something bad. But yeah, I think it's important to have so you can gather information, but I think the real problem is how to store it safely.
Yeah, sure thing. And I think here I might have also tripped on the misconception of AI. Antti, would you like to elaborate, because you spoke about this on your video? Is the AI we're speaking about here, is it the, I don't know if this is a real term, but real AI or something that is just interpreted as AI?
Well, I guess typically AI is something that we don't have, at least so far. It's always, there's been this belief that, okay, when we do a chess playing program, that's AI. Once it's there, then, well, I mean, it's not actually that interesting. And so far, we haven't really cracked something that, I mean, most people would call real AI. But okay, going back to the data, which I guess is the key point here, is that I guess the problem is that kind of these big collections of data are being gathered, and sort of the scary side of it is that many of these entities like companies are using those to build profiles of individuals, and then those profiles can be used to create different kinds of targeted messages, and so that's, I guess, a bit scary side. For pros and cons, I guess it's well, in an ideal world, we would have AIs that wouldn't need to gather these personal data, and I guess that's something that we are developing, but it's still a bit of a way to go there. And sort of the way, sort of metaphor I like to think about this is with environmental protection in the industry. So when the first industrial revolution happened, not all the industries were very environmentally friendly, but over time we have realized, okay, there's these pollution issues, and we have to deal with that, and we can deal with that. And in a sense, I see this privacy as environmental protection for the information age. But in terms of pros and cons, I guess it depends. So at some point I was interviewed for a story done by Helsinki Think about these dating apps and the kind of information they collect and use, which arguably is quite scary. And kind of, if someone gets a hold of sort of all your likes and interactions in a dating app, if you're using it actively, they can learn a scary lot about you. But on the other hand, if you can through the use of that service, you find the love of your life, personally, it might still be something that sort of outweighs the potential risks that there might be. In terms of what the privacy risks are, I guess that's sort of the big unknown. So this, you can have these different people sending targeted messages to influence you in ways you might not like. I guess the other sort of potential might be things like identity theft and others personating as you. And in this dating app story, there was some commenter from the US. I'm not sure if it was from the military or intelligence organizations, but they were like saying that, okay, this would be sort of a gold mine for the secret agent to get this kind of data for their target.
Actually, one of our topics was like, how much should we or could we let AI or algorithms make decisions for us? But I think I could hand this to Teemu or Dina. Which would each of you like to continue with the pros and cons of sharing your information?
So yeah, there's a host of problems there already that have been raised, and this is like, oh my God, where to start? Of course, when we talk about collecting the data, So from the ethical point of view, privacy is number one issue. And what worries me, apart from what previous speakers have mentioned, is the question of consent. So from my point of view, it would be it's okay to gather the information as long as a user is aware of what kind of information is collected, for which purposes it's used, and can opt out. Of course, at certain extent, it slows down a lot the work. For example, if you nowadays when you browse internet, every website you visit asks your permission, and that's hinders a lot the flow of the work with the internet sources. But anyway, this is something that has to be done. So we must avoid by all means a situation where data is being collected anonymously or without a possibility for a person to opt out and things like that. I would be very interesting to hear about Antti's, if I understood correctly what Antti said, that they are working now on the ways to advance the algorithms in AI, which would not rely so much on the collection of big data. I'm very much interested to hear about that, because so far everything I've seen relies on the big data, not only for its operation, but also for its training. And it's a huge problem, because if we cannot limit the use of big data, we cannot advance that much the learning algorithms. But this issue leads me to the question of what the AI is. And from my perspective, I can see that actually, nobody knows really. There is, if you look at the literature, there are all sorts of definitions, all sorts of understandings, and it's all matters which perspective you present. But I would probably disagree that we don't have AI. Of course, it all depends on how you define the AI, but I do think that we have AI in the sort of that traditional kind of weak sense of artificial intelligence, where by which we mean computational systems that are capable of interacting with the environment and also directing its interaction with the environment without direct human control. So in that sense, we do have AI. We don't have AI in the sense of it being, human-like sort of system. Yeah, so these were my thoughts so far.
All right, thank you. And maybe we're also like in the vein of not really knowing what's up anymore. Like Antti brought up industrial revolutions. Certainly, we wouldn't consider train like as a horse. I've heard that comparison sometimes. They do the same thing, but by different means. And horse is something living, and train is not. But maybe we're now like at the crossroads of something different, like qualitatively different. I could hand this to Teemu.
So the question was about this: how to train these AIs without collecting data. So these kind of technologies are actually, well, they're being developed, but they're also being deployed. So under different kind of names, federated learning is one of them, and then you can sort of add different privacy features on top of that. And so, for instance, Google and Apple are using these in their mobile operating systems to train models that would require too sensitive data. Like the prototypical example is Google training their model that they use for their keyboard in Android. They are not collecting the data of what text people are typing on their devices, but rather they are doing this distributed training where the data stays on the user device, but it's being used to train this model. And if you do that right, you can do it in a way that you can give guarantees that there's no way to go back from the trained model or anything that you see during the algorithm to make very strong inferences about what was it that the user actually had typed on their device. So this is an example, and there's sort of lots of other potential use cases like this. One thing that many people at least talk about is the idea of developing models for based on medical data, by combining data from multiple hospitals where you can't combine them in one physical location, but rather you do this shared training by combining these different data sets.
All right, Teemu, could you grab onto that?
Yeah, sure. Right. So where was I? I think before we went to that digression, it was a question on on the general sort of implications of the use of big data and AI on individuals' privacy. I think it's a little bit too sort of wide and deep topic to be addressed maybe in this sort without getting sort of all over the place and sort of remaining a very sort of superficial level. So maybe if I'll just narrow down to a few example questions that there are related to that. So first of all, I'd like to say that it's the definition of AI actually sort of is better to be left entirely out of this, because that'll take ages to try and cover. And it doesn't really matter, because I think the main point here is the big data, or the data part, and people can analyze private data manually on pen and paper. It's just a little bit more tedious, and I think the questions that arise in private data and privacy in general are the same, even if you no matter whether you use some AI kind of tools to analyze it or not. And I think my kind of attitude and sort of outlook on that is actually perhaps more positive than has been sort of given in the discussion so far, because when we start to talk about these things, we usually focus on the problems, and we start listing, we could lose our privacy, we could give too much power to corporations and so on, but we forget that there are already solutions in place. And I really, for instance, love the GDPR, the European Data Protection Regulation. And that piece of legislation that is really applies to all companies that operate in Europe. So no matter where the companies are based, they have to follow this legislation if they have customers in Europe. And it already sort of sets pretty hard limits on the way private data can be stored. I think the critical issue is there really maybe sort of where it doesn't function in the way it always should is Dina's point of view, or point that she made about consent. So people are subscribing to this content forms saying that I accept all terms of use of any service that they are given, because it's too much text to read. Somebody had calculated that it's something like weeks of every year of reading those consent statements or more. So I think that it's not like we don't have any solutions right now in place. We've got GDPR, we've got already things that go beyond that. For instance, the so-called My Data model, which is something to look into if anybody's interested. And those are already solving a lot of, and those are kind of preventing a lot of the bad things that might happen. We just have to sort of learn to use them better.
Thank you for your remarks. I think that's very, very true as an, outside viewer, because I'm not an expert. I really see and hear a lot of bad or concerning things, but it's good to remind that there are also solutions. I would maybe like to bring this back to Frans. Do you think, or in your company, you have, of course, I guess, thought about these things. So do you think you already have the consent of your consumers, like in the wide sense that we talked about here, or is that something to be yet developed on?
Yeah, I think like have to be really careful what actually like storing, like easily like making like backend and adding some logging there, so we kind of log every action that people does to make everything like debuggable. And at the same time, it gets a problem. Even though we are not using the data, we by accident store like every action people does, and then we have to like wait. We have to make another program that basically deletes those actions when they like become irrelevant. And yeah, I really think it's actually a pretty hard problem. It's not like you gather them, but you basically by accident also gather them, and you have to think how you get rid of, because suddenly, because you can never trust that someday someone will steal your PC, and then if you have something bad information, so it's kind of important to make sure that you don't store them. But yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit harder problem than people think, because it's not always you're gathering, it's like it comes by accident.
Yeah, I can really foresee that. I think Antti had hand up. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I wanted to continue with Teemu's note on GDPR. I'm also a big fan of what it says in theory, but I'm not quite as optimistic in the actual enforcement and in how it's changing the world. And there's been some quite scary examples, like there was the Norwegian Consumer Council did a study on, they did some forensics on a number of apps, just apps people install on Android. And the results were quite scary. That, I mean, without asking for permission, I think there was some of the apps, for instance, kind of shared lots of detailed personal information, like detailed GPS locations with third parties. And this was not mentioned anywhere, I know that. And I mean, obviously, kind of this is clearly against the GDPR, but these things happen. And so far, it's unclear kind of how these are being handled, and are they getting the fines that they should? Or so in that sense, I'm not quite sure that I share Teemu's optimism in this. Theory looks good, but practice so far hasn't proven itself.
Yes. Would somebody like to continue on that?
Well, I'll just retort on a very sort of superficial manner that, I mean, there's legislation that says you shouldn't beat up other people, and people are getting beat up anyway. So, I mean, there's no way we could sort of have any legislation that is completely foolproof. But I think that the legislation, the boundaries that it sets are good, and obviously we need to sort of step up on the enforcement, and we also need to develop the legislation further as we go.
All right, sure thing. I think earlier you said that this is a very wide topic, so I'm gonna try to narrow it down to, for example, smartwatches or activity bracelets. Even though they would be completely individual, they won't distribute the data to anywhere. They will still make the human body quantifiable. It's quantifiable as is. Of course, I'm not claiming that biology is not like something very scientific, but if it watches your sleep and your steps or something like that.
I had another issue. If you can give me a second to answer.
Yes, sure.
To the question about legislation, I think it was Teemu who raised that issue. So, of course, we absolutely need a legal framework for regulating technology, the same way as we need a legal framework for almost anything that happens with social kind of interaction, especially when there is potential harm involved. But I also understand Antti's perspective, who says that, it might not work in practice. And it seems to, not work very well, at least yet. And we also don't have enough legislation at the point. However, I think there is a way to sort of fill in this gap or make the legislation work better. And this is, for example, what Think Company does now, is to engage public, right? Is to engage experts, is to raise awareness, is to popularize knowledge, is to explain things, and to raise awareness of all those who are involved into the design, production, incorporation of the AI into the society, professional applications and use, to raise the awareness about potential harms and all those ethically problematic issues in such a way that people will understand the consequences of what they're doing, and they will. I'm kind of pretty much sure that people don't really harm each other just because they want to. So it's about working with the perception of the technology and the sort of raising of moral consciousness in society about those issues. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. I could ask a little bit something from Teemu, because you have been very active with the learning of AI. So do you think that all these questions that we're raising here could be somehow downplayed or taken care of with education, or are we delving into something even more bigger than that?
Well, I guess the short answer is that there's nothing you can't solve if a lot of people educate themselves about the problem and then sort of invest their efforts in solving that. So I guess in a way that that is a yes. One thing that that occurred to me when Dina was talking about the need to legislate technology. One thing that this again goes back to the definition of AI. It's an interesting thing how, for instance, in the current EU framework or EU level discussions about the regulation of AI, there seems to be a need and a push towards defining, to coming up with a crisp definition of what is AI, and then sort of building regulation of AI, so that we would have, let's say, an AI law or AI, some sort of a general AI regulation framework, which I really vehemently object to. We should not have AI regulation. And the point is that, first of all, we will never succeed in defining AI in a crisp fashion so that we could define whether something that some company or whoever is doing is AI or not. Like it's such a sort of unclear concept that we will never be able to define it. And therefore the legislative efforts will be extremely difficult. But even more so, I think it's the risk is that if we start thinking about how to regulate AI or how to regulate this or that kind of big data technology, whatever, we will probably not focus on the existing legislation in any particular sector. And the way I see we should proceed with legislation of AI is just to think of it in a context. So we've got plenty of legislation on freedom of expression or freedom of speech. We've got plenty of expression on privacy. We've got plenty of sort of legislation on safety, traffic, warfare. Sort of everything we do is legislated by particular kind of legislation. And if we apply AI to that problem, let's say we apply AI in traffic, like with self-driving cars, we don't want to have separate legislation for cars that are not human driven and the cars that are human driven. It should be the same legislation. We just need to build it up so that it also addresses the concerns of the changing landscape when we introduce more autonomous technologies there. And same goes with let's say if it's legal or not. to post online a fake video of a political candidate. So if I'm trying to sort of make my political opponent look bad, and I post a fake video, like this new kind of deep fakes online, it is not allowed, and it's not, and I hope it's not allowed. It depends on the country legislation, I guess, whether it's allowed or not. But the point is, it's not allowed or not because there'd be some sort of legislation on AI and deep fakes. It's allowed or not because defamation and misinformation is allowed or not. So we shouldn't sort of think of this as a separate arena where we start from a clean slate and start building AI legislation. We just start with the existing legislation in any given sector and then sort of update that as far as it is needed. So I think that's the more fruitful approach, and in that we need the sector-specific experts in there. And we need, as Dana said, we need doctors that build those health apps, and then we also need, of course, all kinds of doctors that, or all kinds of authorities that monitor and regulate health applications, and that you can't just say whatever you like about any, and can't give medical advice, for instance, if you're not a professional, and that should apply to these apps as well. So I guess again, we shouldn't forget that we shouldn't only focus on the problems and think that there's no legislation on AI. We should focus on the existing infrastructures and legislative frameworks and start from there. It's a lot of work to get involved in them, but that's by far the most fruitful approach in my view.
All right, thank you. Very strong points about the legislation. So if I understood correctly, you think there shouldn't be an regulation for AI, but there should be regulation as in regulation for everything. Yeah, I think that's a good. I think if you are open, we could, or I feel we are sliding into the more general section. So if we could move from the individual level to the more societal level with this legislation questions. Before that, thanks for our audience. There seems to be plenty of us, and keep the questions coming. I've received some excellent questions targeted to all the panelists and then separately, so we can go to those later. But I guess we could start with artificial intelligence in decision making, not only about the AI from human to AI, but incorporating AI to the decision making. There's some talk about, I don't know, ethical algorithms that could make maybe some decisions. Do you foresee that kind of future, or is this too much of a sci-fi thing?
Yeah, I can start the discussion on that. Oh, that's a fascinating topic. Yes, so the problem is there. The problem is that, well, first of all, I do disagree that we cannot define AI. I think we can, and I do have my favorite definition. But more or less, AI would refer then to certain computational techniques that are either embodied or not, and they have a certain sort of freedom from the human control as to how they guide themselves in their interaction with the environment, and that's pretty unique. And the problem is already there because these kind of systems, which are independent from the human control, at least immediate human control, are being integrated into the situations where they are delegated certain role in a decision-making that involves some kind of moral or ethical situation. So they have a certain degree of autonomy or freedom to make decisions when which can affect human well-being. So it's already there. It's the autonomous cars. It's various kinds of AI application in healthcare. It's in warfare, etc., etc., etc. So there are two major questions there, and the first one would be, how to regulate the decision making that an artificial intelligence makes in a certain situation so that it's ethical and minimizes the harm. And the second question is, that's what you just mentioned, is the question whether AI itself will be capable of certain ethical decision making on its own, or whether it can be an artificial agent. So my position, at least so far in this, in the second question, is that as long as we don't have this kind of full AI or this kind of human-like artificial intelligence, which we're most likely not going to have, I don't think it's feasible, at least in any near future, we can forget talking about this full moral agency, so that the AI will be capable of making those decisions, those ethical decisions, and also carry the responsibility. So all that has to, be removed from the capacities of the certain AI system. However, there are attempts, and very interesting attempts, to the moral architectures, which are basically certain delegating particular tasks to a algorithm, so that a user doesn't have to, calculate certain moral dilemmas, for example. So there are attempts to develop moral advisors for medical spheres, which can then be applied further in all areas of life, let's say. So these things are already being developed. They have problems. So I wouldn't say that you can just take them and make an app and, go about with your daily life. And that has something to do with, of course, the capacities of the system, its ontological status, and things like that. But all this leads me to the number one question which I raised. So away from the ethical algorithms and more to the role of the AI in specific ethical situations, such as, for example, the autonomous cars may face in their daily routine. So there the problem is, of course, how much we can automate, how much we can program there, how much we can rely on certain principles, or how much we need to have a human still in the loop in that system.
Just a very quick comment on the terminology. I think it's at least I've been following the notion that AI or let's say systems, artificial systems, cannot be moral agents because they can't assume responsibility on their actions. They can be agents. That is pretty obvious. We can sort of build a system that reacts to its environment and makes the decisions about its behaviors, and even affects the environment by, let's say, turning the wheel, or even switching on the light. And a thermostat in the radiator right next to me is an example of an autonomous agent that measures temperature and switches on or off the flow of water in the radiator. But that is obviously not a moral agent, because it, even if it might harm me, if it does its job bad and I freeze to death, it will not be able to take any responsibility for its actions. And I think that if we assume that kind of the notion of the delineation between an agent and a moral agent, I think it clarifies the issues a lot.
Yes, definitely. And at least for me, I study political history, and I would much rather give AI I would much rather have a self-driving autonomous car making decisions for me rather than a political AI making decisions for me, because the traffic consists of certain very defined rules, and it's not very complicated. The machine will definitely do it better than me, but something as complex as politics or the social sphere, for now, I don't think that it would maybe do a better job than humans. But I think here is the line of like artificial intelligence for me. I'm not sure if I could describe the car intelligence. Maybe if it would play my all-time favorite songs all the time, but still it's kind of a mundane level. But I think the threshold of intelligence for me would be just as Teemu, you said, like if it would be a moral entity, it would be able to make some very elaborate, complex decisions. Dina, you'd like to continue on that?
Yeah, so again, lots of things there. So first of all, let me a little bit disagree with you. So I don't really side with you on thinking that AI would definitely make better decisions than a human driver on the road. In some things, yes, but not in everything. And if we think about the accident that happened in the States a while ago, and if you look at the bottom of what happened there, is that, the algorithm just, I think it actually recognized the pedestrian, but the pedestrian, according to the algorithm, was in the wrong place. So it did not require any kind of action from the algorithm. I think that a human person, in that sense, would make a better choice. I don't say that it had better reaction, but the judgment and the choice would have probably been better. I do agree with the distinction between agents and the moral agent. It's absolutely crucial. And unfortunately, it's not always clear that that distinction is being made. However, the concept of the moral agent is not necessarily has something to do with how the AI is being applied in decision making. So I think Teemu, you are right when you are saying that moral agency has something to do with the ability of the agent to carry responsibility. However, in the discourse on this topic, people frequently use moral agency in sort of weaker sense as the agent whose actions or which actions have immediate moral impact, or maybe a little bit stronger as an agent which makes decisions with some moral parameters involved. So it does not necessarily mean that you have a human-like intelligence, but it means that the system does it on its own without the involvement of a human. And that allows some people to call this system sort of a limited moral agent, or moral agent in some weaker sense. And in that, if we look at the situation from this perspective, then of course artificial intelligence is being used as moral agents in that weaker sense.
Yeah, but as I said, like if we use it in the sense that I described, it clarifies the issue, but that sort of a use seems to muddle the issue extremely much more.
Yes.
So I'd rather stick to the more clear distinction.
I think Antti has had his hand up for a while. I could give the turn to you.
Yeah, well, maybe first a quick comment about the example about the this crash by the Uber self-driving car, which actually illustrates an interesting point where the algorithms have an advantage. So there was a crash, the algorithm didn't work as expected, but now, I mean, we can fix that. And when we fix that, then at the same time, all cars in the world can learn the fix and not to do that kind of mistake again. Whereas with humans, I mean, that's just simply not possible. So with that view, I think kind of in the long term, kind of it may be hard to keep up with the algorithms. In terms of terminology or in general, I'd like to maybe bring back this discussion a bit to the sort of down to the earth and not so much about the philosophical concepts. Personally, I'd like to talk more about automatic decision making rather than decision making by an AI, because somehow when you talk about AI, then people have these connotations. Okay, it must be intelligent, it must be smart, and that. Whereas in most of the cases, they are very mundane things, like examples more akin to the thermostat example that Teemu gave. And sort of on a practical level, if we sort of use a machine learning or any data-based system for making decisions, there's now plenty of examples that if you are not careful and you have data that's biased, it can go badly wrong. The machine is very good at learning those biases. But on the other hand, I think kind of there's also a potential and opportunity in making some of these biases visible. Because now, if it's just a human who is making those decisions, it's sort of very hard to tell. Let's say that, I mean, it's a judge passing sentences, and sort of we can see that, okay, judges tend to be more lenient after lunch rather than just before lunch. But these kinds of things are very hard to control, and then how to influence that in practice. But I mean, if it's an algorithm, these things become much more visible, and then it's easier to address these questions. It's maybe not easy still, but at least it's possible. So I guess, I mean, these sort of bring me a bit of hope, but there's still work to be done in order to sort of make this practical and really improve upon the current situation we have with the sort of more human decision making.
All right, thank you. Would somebody like to continue on that? Frans, you had your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I just want to add like the idea that decision-making AI does something for law, like it's actually already there. Like in the United States, they're like California and New York use software called Compass in their court system, which is kind of support tool to decide what kind of punishment should be given. And the Compass stand for, what was it, something like correctional offensive management for profiling alternative sanctions. But basically, it is software that is AI. It has been used from 2016, if I remember correctly. And the software basically gives a suggestion how likely people who do the crime is like to do another crime. So the jury could think about, is this kind of, what punishment should I use and which kind of my output will be, which is like really interesting to think about it. Like we are already using that kind of things, even though that's still in testing period, but it has been used like in real cases in the United States.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good remark, and I guess the human AI teams have been proven like the most successful for some tasks. Now, Antti, you have your hand up. Do you want to add?
Yeah, well, but I mean, that particular system is one of these examples that sort of, in reality, seems to be extremely racist. That it passes different sentences to people depending on their ethnic origin.
Yeah, and I guess things like that with I guess face recognition has been done because of the people who created the algorithms did not see the bias that they put into it. Dina, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I would disagree with the equation between AI decision making and I don't exactly remember what was said. Was it like automated or automatic decision making? But it probably doesn't make much difference. But anyway, so I don't think they're the same. And I think if we're equating them, we're actually missing something very important. What AI brings, which is both a huge potential and also a huge risk. So an automated decision-making, which is the case of a thermostat, is something which is predictable and fully explainable. And it goes like this: if A, then B. If C, then D, right? There is no much room for surprises there, or any kinds of need to, explain what happened. It's right there in the algorithm. Now, when we're talking about AI, well, maybe not all AI, but certain AI, which is like the most promising at the moment, which is with things like deep learning, then what we're having there is a black box thing, right? So the idea is that we want to have AI not just a predictable thermostat. We want to have an AI which is capable of making its own decisions, or sort of generalizing the rules in the situations where humans don't give the system explicit rules. Stuff like that. And then there is something that the system brings into the decision making which is unpredictable and very often unexplainable, but has a very direct impact on well-being or how the things are going to be in the future. And that, I think, that aspect sets AI aside from things like automated decision making, both for good and for bad. So I had some example while I was waiting in the queue, but I think it's gone now. So maybe I'll just stay with this.
All right. Would you like to follow up on Dina's speech?
Well, I guess I do agree to a large extent, in the sense that many AI systems are extremely hard to kind of predict what they're going to do exactly, especially if they're like constantly evolving, with respect to feedback loops from their users and other systems. So that it gets extremely tricky, and we should focus a lot on the testing and the maintenance of such systems, and it's not easy. I just rather make it a continuum of their complexity and of how black the box actually is. So of course, I think it's been exaggerated a little bit, the black box nature of these systems. Obviously, when we write the code for those systems, we know what the code reads, and we can simulate them. It's not like it would be completely unpredictable and ununderstandable and unexplainable. It's just that there's a lot of, there's so many different features and so many different gears, as it were, turning inside the box, which we can look into, but it's essentially so complex that it's very hard to anticipate how it's going to behave and how it's going to evolve and adapt over the course of time, that it becomes complicated. But I'd rather sort of have a kind of like an axis of like simple, complex, or predictable, unpredictable, rather than saying, oh, AI is unpredictable, algorithms or automated systems are predictable, and because it's, once again, it'd be impossible to draw the line anywhere. But it's a good point that we should definitely pay more attention to the testing and the maintenance of those systems as we go.
Sure thing, and there's seems to be a lot about the definitions of this whole issue. Maybe Antti, you can continue on Teemu's remarks.
Okay, yeah, okay. I do agree that, sort of automated decision making is more general and includes more, but I also agree with Teemu that, I think I would place all the AIs within that, and sort of, especially if we are talking about some sort of critical system, we would probably want to test that, and something that behaves chaotically, like let's say that we have an autonomous car that somehow behaves in a chaotic manner and sometimes can behave in a very unpredictable manner, even in controlled situation. I guess we wouldn't want that, but rather we would want something that's something where sort of some behavior is certified and it's not going to change very dramatically over time. So to a large extent, I would still claim that, AI is a very complicated system, and it might be opaque, but ultimately you give it an input, it gives an output. At least, even deep learning models, if you give it the same input, it will always give the same output. So in that sense, it's not completely different from the rule-based system. It's just way more difficult to understand.
Yeah, maybe Dina could continue that, but I would like to say that, so basically what you're saying, a machine or AI, it's on principle, it's way more predictable than a human being. You give it something, it gives an output based on the parameters. But there has been talk about the unpredictableness. So I guess that comes from the variable differences with human decision that maybe the unpredictableness comes from. I don't know. This was just my own thoughts. Dina, you can continue.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, what's important in predictability, at least from ethical point of view, because of course we can understand differently what is meant by being predictable and unpredictable, is what is important is that we are able to give an explanation of why a decision has been done. For example, by a doctor in a certain situation which involves health or life and death of a patient, right? And justification for that certain decision. And what happens in the situations like medical advisors is, AI medical advisors, is that the doctor uses the system, or another medical personnel uses the system. It gets a certain suggestion or a certain prescription from that system, and he or she carries on with the life and health of the patient based on the decision that has been made by AI. So what's important from ethical perspective is that the patient has the right to understand, know, and reason with a decision that is being made in respect of his or her health. And when the doctor is unable to explain why he or she came up with a certain decision, other than saying, that machine told me to, we're in real trouble. So the problem is that very frequently, so I think I don't think we disagree with Teemu on this, but I think we're talking about different things. So yes, when we are dealing even with the deep learning algorithms, of course, we know what we code in it. We know what the model is. We know elements of the model. We have somewhat an understanding how the filters work, how the weights work, so that we know when we have an input, what kind of output we get. However, that's not an explanation of the decision that the system comes up with. That's an explanation of the mechanism by which a certain system works. We need to be able to, in ethics at least, we need to be able to provide explanation in terms of reasons and in terms of good reasons when health of people is and life of people is involved. And talking again about these self-driving cars. So I know, at least if you think about Model Machines project. So what Model Machines project does, it uses neural networks to train the algorithm to come up with the solutions of moral dilemmas based on basically what is a crowdsourced morality in a sense, so that they first gather people's opinions about how would they solve this dilemma. And that on basis of this information, algorithms are trained to make decisions in new situations independently from human intervention. Now, from ethical perspective, is that a good way of doing it? I would say it's a problematic way of doing it, because when there is a moral dilemma, and I don't say that moral dilemmas are somehow, a cornerstone of everything. No, I'm not a big fan of moral dilemmas. But if we assume that we're talking about moral dilemmas, so in that situation, if you make a choice and you want to be a responsible moral agent, it's not enough just to say, oh, that's how 100 other people would act, or the majority of people would prefer to act. That's not a very good explanation. What you need to explain, you need to give a good reason for why you preferred one alternative to another, not just based on social consensus, or I don't know, perhaps because your religion tells you so, but based on some universalizable sort of moral grounds, such reasons that could be applied to everybody irrespectively of any kind of such subjective situations as social norms, traditions, religion, etc. So as I say, there is explainability and explainability, right? There is explainability and justification, and yeah. I think that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll soon move to the audience questions because there were a few, but I saw that Antti had his hand up for a while. Do you want to continue with Dina's remarks?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about this explainability because, I mean, obviously it's something that, I mean, would be nice to have, but sort of I've been wondering, I mean, how much people actually would be willing to compromise for the explainability? Because, I mean, if you require that a model must be explainable, then that must have a cost. And sort of I've come up with this thought experiment that, okay, let's assume that, I mean, you have some medical problem, and there's two systems that can sort of diagnose you. One of them is a complete black box, but we know from history that it gives sort of correct diagnosis, let's say 99% of the time. The other one is an explainable system. It tells exactly why it does what it does, but we know from history that it's only correct, say, 70% of time. And these two give a different result. Now, which one do you believe? And it might be that, okay, you have to make a treatment, and if you guess wrong, then you die. If you guess correct, then you are cured. So how much are you willing to bet for the explanation if you know from history that the non-explainable one would have much better odds of giving you the right answer?
Yeah, Dina, you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks. That's an excellent question. And it is a problem. I mean, it is something that we as a society need to think about. However, the thing is that if we ask a question how much people are actually ready to sacrifice or sacrifice in terms of technological development in favor of explainability, this is the one question. So this is more like the question of what's the public opinion on that matter. But that's a different question from how should we proceed in this matter. So should we actually stop using unexplainable algorithms? And if we should, then on what grounds? And I don't say that we should, I'm just saying that that's a theoretical dilemma. So I don't have a answer straight away for you. But my intuition in this situation is such that if we cannot come up with really good reasons why we should prefer unexplainable, unjustifiable methods, which is basically sort of scientifically problematic methods. So if we're unable to come up with this kind of very good reasons, then perhaps we should, a little bit hurry less with the integration of those methods into the society where they can have a real impact. Well, at least up to the point where we even have those good reasons, or we are able to make those systems more explainable, more justifiable, and more ethical in that sense.
Well, I mean, there's a statistical justification that says that in history it has been way more often correct than the explainable one.
Okay, so you see, it's all about which sort of values you are ready to weigh, right? Because different tools may achieve your goal with different degree of success, but in the process you may lose something which is important for you as, say, a human or as a society. Listen, I don't say that we should not proceed with this. Okay, so don't misunderstand my position. I'm just saying that we need to keep talking about it. We need to keep trying to understand, and we need to keep trying to look for reasons and see whether there is, and keep trying to balance the benefits and the evils that may possibly follow from certain technological decisions. So at this point, I tell you, I don't have a very good answer. I just have sort of hinges how this should proceed. There is something disagreeable about a person not being able to understand what happens to significant parts of his life. When a person loses control and rational control over certain dimensions of his life, such as health, for example. So I think that's a reason at least to keep thinking, discussing, and not hurrying with certain solutions.
Yeah, thank you for your remarks. I think we'll move to the audience questions because there was one that kind of touches on this one, and this is for everybody, but I guess we could go and take short answers from everyone, starting from Frans. So the question is this: do you think that people are relying too much on the development of technology, making them more passive? For example, with the global warming, some people might think that technology will be able to solve environmental problems.
I don't think so. Actually, I kind of think a bit differently. Like we should bet more on education and more on research to make those kind of achievements. And currently, we are not trusting that if we put funding to research, we do something fancy. We are like, we don't put any money there, and then we are like hoping that it works, and then we are like, it's not working. It's kind of, I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, so you think it's not making people more passive, but rather active? Would you say?
Yeah, kind of like it's kind of, it's not making passive, but we have to make something to make it happen, and then we can make active. But yeah.
Yeah, sure thing. And I think this question is sort of about what Antti and Dina talked about, like how much are you willing to give up for like the machines to make decisions for you, and then you're passive yourself. But Teemu, what do you think about this?
Well, I think I'd like to sort of not completely seriously, but it's kind of, it falls onto Frans to be the kind of play the part of the Silicon Valley techno utopian here, right, Frans? Do you accept that role?
Okay, yeah.
So there you go. Like you said, you'd been to Stanford and everything. So I think there is this discourse ongoing where the likes of Elon Musk and other kind of entrepreneur-minded people in Silicon Valley like to depict technology and innovation, especially like technological innovation. There's other kinds of innovations as well, but technological innovation as the kind of holy grail and the solution to everything. So this like solutionism thinking, where we don't want to address our hard and wicked problems that are most, in many cases, I'm not saying like most often or less often than something else, but they're kind of sort of now and then societal issues, and issues where the answers probably also lie in like humans changing their behavior and their thinking and maturing as a society. And sort of if we always look into technology for the solution, then we're going to miss out on a lot of ways in which we could improve our lives, and a lot of the things in which we could improve. A lot of things in the world are really like very, very good old-fashioned. Like even Roope, you mentioned in the beginning, like is education the solution to this? And I said yes. So it's a kind of an example where a lot of our problems are solved if people just like think carefully and think and understand, and sort of this kind of enlightenment thinking in terms of building our kind of civilization and our like ourselves, rather than gadgets and bells and whistles. I think there's a lot to be said about that discourse, and there's a lot being said about that as well, as far as that happens on different media platforms.
All right, so one might say that you think that it could make the society or the people passive if we don't do anything about it, but if we carefully inspect it as we go, it will be good.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sorry, Frans, for throwing you under the bus here.
Nothing. Interesting to hear that. Another view.
Yeah. How about Dina? What do you think about the passiveness?
It's a very good question. I think that it will make some people more passive, some people maybe more active. So it's hard to say. What maybe a more interesting question is whether how the reliance on technological solution would affect our cognitive capacities. So it's in a sense relating to the question of being passive or active. And I think that the reliance on technological solutions does affect our cognitive abilities. So it's true that, for example, the memory capacities are becoming worse. And also is that there is such a phenomenon as hyperlink thinking. So, in a sense, you no longer need to store some information in your memory, you just need to know how to find that information, sort of where to click to retrieve it. Now, is that bad? I'm not sure, because, technology is a part of society. Society changes, human response changes, so the way we are in the world changes because we are responding to the world which we are living in, and technology is a part of that. So it's, for me, it's kind of hard question to answer, but I do agree with you and with the rest of the participants who said that it has a lot to do with the level of education and awareness about limitations of technology. So what technology can do and what it cannot do. So that there are no false expectations and there are no, actually probably that's what I'm interested in, the false expectations. And I really like that idea about building. It warms my philosophical heart to hear about people being concerned about this issue. So yeah.
All right, thank you. Antti?
Well, not much to add. I think I'm very much with Dina in that. I mean, it depends on the person, depends on the topic. And obviously, I mean, there's the historical view that ever since we stopped being hunter-gatherers and started the agricultural revolution, there have been some skills that we've lost and some things we become passive over. And I mean, are we worse for that? I guess I'm not the person to judge. Maybe someone else knows more about the history, but I mean, it's just how our society evolves.
Societal question. Do you think the development of technology and AI is making world globally more socially equal or unequal, and why? I think we can go with the same order. So Frans, you can go first.
I'm kind of afraid that it will make more unequal when like one big company or small one that has the best AI, kind of best tech, can serve for every possible people there what they want, and the money goes only for one company instead of having little small ones that only serves for local ones. Of course, it's more efficient to have one giant company that does everything, but I'm kind of afraid that money will go only for few people.
All right, thank you. Teemu?
Yeah, I'm very much on the same page as Frans here, and we don't even need to name the company or the companies that are now winning in the global economy. The ones who have the most data and the ones who are able to sort of serve us the best and sell stuff more. They're obviously gaining more, and it's not like an egalitarian development. Of course, there's potential, and that's there is potential for increased productivity. There's a lot of potential in AI because it requires less of let's say, it doesn't require any particular natural resources. It doesn't require you to build a manufacturing plant to be able to enter the market. So there's a lot of potential for sort of shortening the time span from innovation to production, and that might sort of be used to level the playing field and ease the entrance of new players in the market. And I think there is a lot of potential also in reversing that development. But unless we have some sort of economic incentives and economic mechanisms to reverse that, it's not going to happen on its own, and Google is going to become bigger and bigger and eat everything. So it's a huge concern.
All right, so we're still a bit of on the unequal side. How about Dina, what you think?
Well, I do agree with the concerns raised so far. I do, however, have a little problem with the concept of equality. So I think it has to be taken in a context. And certain things will be more equal, and certain things will be more unequal. It's hard to speak very generally. So, and also, I don't think I'm capable of covering the entire field the way it should be in just a couple of minutes. I do have, however, an additional worry about surveillance issue, which is not just a violation of privacy, but it's also a question of social inequality. And so if we have the situation when, which we already have to a certain extent, when certain power points, be it economical power points or political power points, have access to the information or activities of many people or most of the people or everyone, then what implications does this have for free society, right? For things like democracy and etc. Yeah, so that's my additional worry.
All right, so you're thinking kind of the inequality might come from above to below, that the big actors might get hold of information and then, insert unequal values or something. Am I correct?
In a sense, yes. I think in a nutshell it is that. But also, if we understand equality as a element of democracy, then undermining democratic institute means undermining equality. So this is why I say we have to ask more specifically in which context we use the concept of equality. What do we mean by that? So different things follow from that.
Yeah, sure thing. How about Antti? What do you think about the equalness, unequalness?
Well, I very much agree with the points that have already been raised. Maybe one additional angle to that is that, I tend to think about AI very much as an amplifier of power. It gives sort of smaller entities the possibility of doing things, reaching people that would previously have required resources that were only available to some very small, very large entities like nation states. And in some sense, this increases equality, but is it equality for good? That is then a different question, because often the parties that use this may not have sort of intentions that are sort of good for the general population.
All right, thank you. Maybe we could take one question to Teemu, which was about this is a little lighter one. Does one need to have a PhD in machine learning to be able to work with AI?
This is like a paid question. This is my favorite question. I wonder who I owe a pint of beer when all this is over. No, definitely not. I think everybody can learn the basics of AI. And obviously, if you want to sort of be at the cutting edge of developing new technology, then you need to study long and hard, be it a PhD or in your professional capacity, or just hacking away on your own. It's different thing. But then the really important thing that I want to emphasize is that anybody should be able to understand the basics of like what does it mean in general? What are the basic kind of concepts and how are they affecting our lives? Because it's not because you'd be building AI systems, but because they are being applied on you or data about you. And we should be able to form an informed opinion about it. And then we should be able to sort of try and promote our values and our thinking about how it should be applied. And sort of make the world a better place and sort of be able to influence things. Because if we don't know the basics, then it's really hard for us to form an informed opinion, and then we're kind of left in the backseat when somebody else is driving. Maybe the AI is driving this autonomous car. If that's a good metaphor.
Yeah, quite literally. Would somebody like to continue on that? All right, I think these are good remarks to end this session on or at least the recording. Thanks for all the participants and the experts for great conversation, great questions. And I think for our first remote Think Tuesday, this went very well. So I guess even after the pandemic, we could try something like this. After this, I'll hang out at this session for a little while. If you want to show your faces or discuss about these issues a little bit more, I still have some questions and things that we didn't discuss on. Our experts may stay or leave however you like, and we'll be here like until 7 or something like that, depending on the participants. But for now, I would like to give big thanks to everyone involved.